Hello and welcome back to our 15th live stream, where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. Okay, I'm going to have to admit something right out of the gate here. I am not feeling well at all. I had my second jab yesterday, and, well, let me just say I've had dizziness, fever, chills, and
obviously you can't even stand.
Viper is flown from the seated position, sir.
And fortunately, live streams also can be done from the seated position. So that's why I've decided to just go ahead and still do this live stream, because as long as I'm still able to do this live stream, I'm going to. So I'm not feeling well. So, cut me some slack here if I, bungle things on occasion. So, I've had lots of vaccinations in the past. This is the worst I've ever gone through with one. So, this was not fun. Yesterday, after receiving it, I slept 19 hours. So, it knocked me flat on my back. With that said, however, let's get into the live stream. Now, the rules are the same as always. We take super chats have priority, but if you want to direct a question to me and it's not a super chat, please preface it with a Q and a colon, and please only post your question once so I can figure out what was actually answered. Repeating it only just causes me confusion when I scan through the live chat. So I ask that you don't post things more than once. So with that said, I'm going to explain the title of this video, because there was a few people who were confused about 15 being a taboo number. And so we're going to actually talk about this just a little as we start, because it's actually really, really fascinating. 15 is not considered a taboo number in the Bible. And it's really not considered a taboo in, say, Jewish culture, except in how it can be spelled. This happened when Jewish culture started using letters of the alphabet as substitutes for numbers. So I'm going to just pull up a little, sorry, not that one, this one. Okay. So here we've got the number 15 spelled with Hebrew characters. Basically, these are Aramaic characters. Okay, the Yod and the Hey. The Yod representing 10, the Hey representing 5. Okay, but the problem is that when you spell 15 this way, which would be the normal way to spell it in using Hebrew letters, you get Yah. And this was seen as being, how do we say it? Irreligious, blasphemous, possibly, depending on context. So what they did was instead of spelling 15 with the Yod Hey, they would use the Tet Vav, which is 9 plus 6. So they still achieve 15, but they just spell it slightly different than they would approach other numbers. So that's what we mean here by 15 being a taboo number. It's not the number itself that's taboo. It's just the normative way, the way it would be spelled if we just use the normal, the canonical method of letter to numeral equivalence. So that's what we meant by the 15 and other taboo numbers. So I hope you found that interesting. So we're going to get on to our first super chat here, which is from Reginald O'Donoghue. Thank you very much for £5 British. What relation, if any, does the instruction of Merikare's statement that they, humans, are the likeness of him, God, have to Genesis 1:26? Okay, there's actually two passages in Merikare that refer to humans being like God. And they actually have some very different nuances, and they have very different sort of equivalents in, say, in the biblical text. We're going to pull up chapter 59 from Merikare first, okay? And the existence, and this is from Mary Carre, chapter 59, and the existence in the beyond is for eternity. So once you die, it's forever. A fool is he who does what offends them being the gods. But as for him who reaches them, having done no wrong, he will exist like a god, walking proudly like the lords of eternity. So this is more or less saying that that the likeness of God here is not so much being made in the image of God, but that one's morality is a determinant of what your life will be like in the next world. Now, with that said, however, the Egyptians did believe in a process of apotheosis, which means that humans did become like gods. Okay, so there is that thinking in Egyptian culture. So it was believed in Egyptian culture that that people would, once they died, they underwent this process of change that transformed them into a godlike being. So there is that. But there's also another passage in Mary Carre that's very interesting, but for a completely different reason. And then we're going to pull that up too. And this is from Mary Carre, chapter 20. Now, the first sentence here is fragmentary, and you can probably reconstruct it as a man in your village like a god. If there is a man in your village like a god. If you find someone who did not have many supporters, and whom the townspeople did not know, but whose many partisans are now a multitude, and respect him for his possessions and for his cleverness, one who gained men's confidence, and has ingratiated himself in the sight of his dependents, and who persists as a troublemaker and a spreader of talk. Get rid of him and slay his children, obliterate his name and destroy his supporters, banish all memory of him and the partisans who respect him. Okay. Now, this actually has a biblical parallel in Proverbs 82:6, where God says, I have called you a god. I've called you gods, you faithless judges of Israel. Okay? So there's this aspect that in one way there's an illusion here going on, and neither Proverbs nor Mary Carre is basically saying that human beings here are a god, as in ontologically, as part of their nature, godlike. What it's saying is that someone who's accumulated so much power that they start to abuse it. So there is an interesting parallel here between Mary Carre, chapter 20, and Proverbs 82:6. Now, in the case of the Egyptian wisdom literature, it's a lot more drastic, but we don't have any evidence that this was actually ever done in reality. But it's basically saying if someone came from an outsider came in, who nobody knew, had no supporters, had no money, and then he suddenly accumulates a lot of power and supporters and money, and then starts to behave badly, that he's a threat to the entire community and he should be dealt with. So that's what they're saying. That's what Mary Carre is saying here, and it's much more of a wisdom aphorism than it is an instruction of what to do. So it's a very interesting sort of treatment of a similar problem we find in Proverbs 82:6. So anyway, I hope that answers your super chat. It was a very interesting super chat. Thank you very much. Okay, our next super chat is from Michael Serber for $4.99. Thank you very much. Would Egyptian context understanding have carried through to the Jews of Jesus' day from the time of Moses? How did 1500 years impact their perception? Okay. Very much like it impacted our perception. It's clear that by the time of the 1st century that the Egyptian context and understanding had sort of dropped out of the readings of scripture. Now, it was still there in the text, but people didn't understand it anymore. We can see that that, say, during the intertestamental period and, say, the 1st century, that what happened is that the Israelite people had become so far removed from Egypt that, you know, by the Babylonian exile, by their experiences with Syria, that Egypt was no longer relevant as a culture. You know, during the time of, say, the Maccabees, there was still some Egyptian incursion into Palestine via the Ptolemies, but, you know, that didn't leave the cultural residue that we would, that, you know, because it wasn't sort of a permanent fixture in their daily lives. Okay. So we have to be sort of circumspect here, because even though they lost sort of the Egyptian understanding, dropped out of their, say, exegesis and their culture, what was important to them, say, remained, which was the who God was, what he had done. They're still practicing the Passover, so in that respect, some of that still remained, but all the sort of the Philly bits, the nuances, all of that had sort of dropped out of the culture. So it wasn't so much that it didn't have a big effect on their exegesis. But it is true that it was no longer there in the way that it would have been during the late Bronze Age, where it had been so close to the events. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Let's fire up Twidget here. And it's hanging on me. Lovely. I'll restart it. We're loading. All right, here we go. All right, there we go. Ryan Naylor for $5. Thank you very much. Which active A&E site is the most promised for potential discoveries, and which site is essentially beating a dead horse? Okay. This is a very interesting question, because it sort of demands the question of, when is a site finished? You know, a lot of archaeologists, you know, take a sampling approach. So it's basically, if you've excavated like 5% of the site, that's good enough to infer the rest. So it's usually not necessary to excavate a complete site. This also sort of leaves room for future generations to excavate with new understandings, new methods, new techniques, and to get new discoveries out of that. Because once you destroy an archaeological site, it's dead. You know, you can't re-excavate a site once it's fully excavated. So, with that said, I'm also sort of against the idea of completely digging up an entire site. I think there's some real issues with that, and I think there are some excavators out right there, especially from, say, more evangelical circles, that think that you need to plow up the entire site to get everything out of it. And I think that's doing future generations a real disservice. So, with that said, however, I think there's some sites that have more promise, but there's also some sites that you think are completely depleted that, you know, prove to be incredible, are hiding incredible discoveries. Like, for example, probably one of the most famous examples was KV5 in the Valley of the Kings. Now, this is the tomb of the sons of Ramses II. You know, That tomb has been discovered, has been known since the 19th century. And, you know, people, you know, it was thought that there was only such just a sort of an foyer and nothing more, that there was nothing behind that. There was sort of the door was buried up. People thought it was a false door. Well, they sort of, you know, clean out the foyer, the antechamber, and then they discover it's not a false door, but a real door. And a real door that behind it are 120 chambers. It was an incredible discovery. But it was also thought that there was nothing more to gain from excavating that. So it can be really hard to say what has promise and what doesn't. Now, with that said, I do have some opinions that I think where people are beating a dead horse. I think Shiloh is beating a dead horse. That had been excavated once, and I think ABR is just sort of determined to churn up the entire site until they get what they want. So I think that's beating a dead horse, and not only that, I think it's ruining the site for future generations too. So nothing they've discovered there has been earth shaking. They've gotten some little discoveries here and there. I don't think they'll interpret it right, because I think they're really sort of dead set on a certain interpretation. But I think what they're getting out of it doesn't sort of justify the process they're going through to achieve it. So anyway, that's okay. Let me take the other hand of that question too, which is has the promise for discoveries. I think Tel El Rataba has a great promise for discoveries. I think that there's in the Wadi Tumilat, I think there's lots of archaeological sites there that need more attention. I think that's a great region for archaeology. I think there needs to be more done in the Wadi Tumilat. I think there needs to be more done near the site of Ismailia too. I think there's some towns over there that I think could produce some very important clues. I think Jericho still has some potential to produce some fine stuff as well. So, but we'll see. We'll see about this. I think because of the way Jericho, the history of Jericho does with its with the Iron Age leveling, I think it's going to be very much not on the tell itself, but maybe on the sides of the tell, that they might find some little tantalizing clues here and there. But with that said, I think those are sort of the low-hanging fruits here. So anyway, one other site I think has some real potential, which is Carchemish. I think that site has not, they only partially excavated it before they had to get out of there. But I think if we could find some what's it called now, Mitanni inscriptions, that could go a huge way. If we can find some Mitanni inscriptions and Mitanni texts, that would be incredibly helpful for our understanding of things. So I think there's some real low-hanging fruit there that could really help us with our understanding of things. So with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, what's next? Okay, Disciple of Christ for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. How much Egyptian culture did Egyptians keep after becoming Hellenized? How deeply entrenched was Hellenization? It was quite entrenched, but it also was very isolated too. We have to kind of understand that when the Ptolemies took over Egypt, it was sort of in the northern part of the country, really around Alexandria and a good portion of the Delta. So that was really where Hellenization had its biggest influences. Further south, when you get to Hermopolis, Magna, and Thebes, there's much more resistance to Hellenization. And in many respects, what you had was sort of two cultures living side by side. You had a Greek culture and you had an Egyptian culture, and they're living in parallel. Now, with that said, there is crossover, cultural crossover between the two. We do find some Egyptian hymns translated into Greek, and we also find Greek hymns translated into Egyptian. So there is cross-fertilization between the two cultures. And Hellenization, especially, say, Neoplatonism, plays a large role in the development of Egyptian religion in the 3rd centuries BC up to, say, the 3rd centuries AD. So it's actually a really important contributor to those various religious ideas and thoughts. So we also find too that much of the Hellenization that happens in Egypt, it concerns legal codes, contracts. The Greeks were very, very big on contracts. That's one of the things we find in the Oxyrhynchus papyri, which is all these contracts, marriage contracts, contracts to rent donkeys, these sorts of things, buying property, wills, these are things that Hellenization brought into Egyptian culture. So we do actually find a huge influence of Hellenistic culture, but we also find resistance too. Like, for example, Egyptian as a language changes as a result of Hellenization. One of the things the Egyptians do is they add all sorts of useless letters to their writing to confuse a Greek reader. So they try to obfuscate their writings so that it can't be read by a Greek speaker. So you have to be sort of inculcated into Egyptian culture and the Egyptian priesthood to be able to read these. Now we can read them today because they didn't do that good of a job of obfuscation, but they did try. They did do this to resist, the Greeks coming in and just reading it off the walls. So it's a complicated situation. But we do find that both happened, that you had both, resistance and cross-fertilization. So anyway, thank you very much for your question. Very much appreciated. And thank you for the super chat. Okay, Justin Hall for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. I have found many translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I cannot find any publication of it in the original languages. Do you know of any published texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew, Aramaic? Yes, I do. There's a 40-volume set called the Discoveries in the Judean Desert, and it's just the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The only problem is it is super expensive. I mean, it is crazy expensive. It's like $250 a volume. And they don't translate it for you. It's in the original Greek, Aramaic. They even publish it in the Paleo. Sometimes when text is in Paleo Hebrew, they'll publish it in that too. So they're publishing it in its original as it appears on the scroll. It's an awesome collection. I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, I use it frequently myself. I have like the first 25 volumes or 24 volumes, something like that, and a bit of the index, which is volume 39, I believe. But it's incredible, but it's also exceptionally expensive. They're like $250 a volume, so it's not something that your average Bible student is going to be able to just pick up. But if you have a theological library close to you, a lot of them do carry this because it is such an important set of works. So it is available through Oxford University Press. They do have a online website, so you can actually order it, but prepare to take out a a foreign aid loan. Yeah, it's they're not cheap. I wish they were a lot less expensive, or they were at least more condensed, but they're text critical editions. They have great apparatus. They are the best publications and the authoritative publications for the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I think it's one of those things where they're fantastic, but you're going to pay for it too. And no other edition has really rivaled it yet. So unfortunately, I can't say more than that. But whenever I do get a coupon from Oxford University Press, which I do get on occasion for writing an article for them, I'll blow it all on these volumes because they're just so fantastic. So I hope that answers your question. Good luck on this one, because I really think there needs to be a reader's edition in the original languages, but it hasn't happened yet. So with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Let's see, is there any more super chats? Does not look like there's any more super chats. So let's see about non-super chats. Okay. I'll take this from Warrior of the Most High. Were there human sacrifices in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and when it ended? Yes, there were. In both, actually. Now, Mesopotamia, you had human sacrifices. We know that there were human sacrifices with, say, some of the tombs of kings, where their functionaries were sacrificed along with the kings when the king was buried. We also see this happening very early on in Egypt, for the first two dynasties. King Kassem Kemwe of Dynasty 2 is probably the last king where we find retainers sacrificed along with the king. So we do find it in Egypt. We also find it too in where, say, prisoners of war are captured, and a select number of them are killed and buried in the foundation deposits of a temple. And we do see the reliefs of this on the walls. We also, there's some evidence of this at the Temple of Mut, where there was a prisoner that was had his hands and feet bound behind his neck and was buried underneath the foundations of the Temple of Mut. So it does seem to have been a practice in Egypt. Not a widespread practice. It doesn't happen that often. But there is some evidence too that there might have even been child sacrifice too. There's some allusion to that, although we don't have the evidence for that. So I can't say anything more than that, but there is evidence of at least some human sacrifice in Egypt and in Mesopotamia. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay. See here. Murray of Sweden for 50 Swedish krona. Thank you very much for the super chat. I often hear people say that the Dead Sea Scrolls are pretty much the same as the Bible we have today. Do you agree with this? That's a yes or no thing. That's a yes and no thing. The Dead Sea Scrolls does not change a single major doctrine we find in the Bible we have today. Okay? But what you do find is variations of spelling, variations of grammar, little things, really little things. But things that, if you're doing exegesis, can actually be quite important. Of the text types we have today, and what I mean by a text type is a family of texts that have arrived to us from the past. Our modern Bible today that most of us use is based on a text type called the Masoretic text. And it's a family of texts that were sort of put together in the 10th century AD by the Masoretes. Okay? Now, their original text goes way back to the first or the second temple period at least. So, while it's codified in the 10th century AD with the Masoretic marks, it is a much older text, in fact. But it's one of three families. The other two families are the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch. Okay, and all three of these come from sort of different textual traditions that have sort of split off from the original autographs of the Bible. The Dead Sea Scrolls almost add a fourth text family to this. We find that the Dead Sea Scrolls will agree with some readings in the Masoretic text, but not others. They'll sometimes agree with the Septuagint. They'll sometimes agree with the Samaritan Pentateuch. They will sometimes are completely unique. So when we look at, what is the original reading of a biblical text, we kind of have to go and take all four text family sources and to see what is the original reading. So the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text are not exactly the same. They're not exactly the same. There are differences. But they're sort of very, very minor differences. And using them, we can actually discover what the original autograph said. So, while I don't agree with the statement, I do suggest that it's not so far from that it changes anything substantial. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Super chat from Anthony Rougier for $5. Thank you very much. Book recommendations for Egyptian chronology, ancient Near Eastern chronology. Yes, there has not actually been very many books written on this subject, but there is one that's sort of escaping my memory right now. It will just take me a moment to look this up. It is called Ancient Egyptian Chronology, and it's an anthology. As my NAS, the squirrels or the hamsters in my NAS start sort of churning up here, taking their sweet time. Alrighty. And it was edited by Horning. Hornung, sorry. It's edited by Eric Hornung, Ralph Croce, David Warburton. It's published by Brill, and the copyright date is 2006. Now, it has gotten long in the tooth. I will say that. But it is still an excellent resource. Chronology is unfortunately one of those things where people have not done a lot of really good books on this. I had started a book on this, and I actually had to stop working on it for other reasons. But this is an area that is badly in need of sort of a general primer or third-year textbook. So there does need to be something written on this, but that ancient Egyptian chronology is probably the best, I would say, that you can start with right now. Hopefully the future will give us a actual primer that we can actually use, and that's actually useful not only as a good foundation, but as a classroom textbook, because we really need a good classroom textbook for this. So because unfortunately a lot of university courses on chronology are not taught well, and they're not taught well because there is no sort of base textbook to sort of guide it, and very few people out there are actually experts who know how Egyptian chronology is actually done. And I'd say that even amongst people who say teach Egyptian chronology in a university. So a lot of Egyptologists even are not aware of the nuances that go into chronology. So I think this is something that needs more attention, but unfortunately we have limited resources right now. So, but anyway, I hope that gives you a start at least. thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Justin Hall for $10. Thank you very much. I want to get my master in theology and a PhD in biblical scholarship in both New and Old Testament. Pick one. Plus some degree in the patristic period. Pick one. Old Testament, New Testament, or patristics. You really need to pick one. You can't do it in all three. Trust me on this one. This one's just too heavy. There's too much material here for you to do a PhD in all three. Do you know of any good universities, and do they offer it online? Okay, I will say this. Online education is crap. I can't say it more simple than that. There's so much you learn by actually sitting in a classroom, talking with the professor, having that face-to-face dialogue, and that psychologists say that 70% of communication is nonverbal. The whole problem with online learning is that it gives you knowledge transfer, but not information transfer. Okay? And here's what I mean by that. Knowledge is just the head knowledge. That's the facts. That's the facts. That's the data. That's the theories. That's the head knowledge. But information knowledge is a lot more than that. Information will give you metadata. You know, it'll give you the mood of the professor when he says, yeah, you know, scholars hold of this theory. You know, he's communicating there that whatever that theory is, it's garbage. Okay? You know, and when you do online courses, a lot of that metadata gets lost. And in many respects, that metadata is the most important part. There's also the other thing, too, is at the graduate level, and this is not so much important for the undergrad level, but at the graduate level, you're not just there to get a credential. You're not there to just earn a degree. You're there to build relationships with people. Okay? You know, I still have relationships with the professors that, you know, that I had when I took my MDiv and my first MA. You know, these are people I still talk to on a very regular basis, at least, you know, once every 6 months. You know, these are the people you're going to be working with for decades to come. These are going to be the people who give you recommendations for jobs. These are going to be the people that, you know, if you've got a really, say, problematic idea that needs a second opinion, you're going to email it to them, and they're going to look at it and they're going to say, yeah, that idea is strong, or that idea is garbage. You know, don't risk your reputation on it. But they're not going to do that for you unless you build that relationship with them to begin with. So I would really highly advise against online education. And I can't say that strongly enough. It's not good. And really, if you take a degree through an online university, your chance of getting work in the field is very low too, because it's now pretty much been recognized that these are not good degrees. So, with that said, however, there are lots of good universities out there where you can obtain degrees in Old Testament or New Testament or patristics. Less for patristics. Patristics is there's not actually a lot of schools that offer really good degrees in patristics. In fact, one of the reasons why I ended up going into Egyptology was I couldn't get into there was no programs on patristics that were accepting students at the time I was looking for a PhD. So that's really the reason why I sort of went into Egyptology, because the option for patristics wasn't available. Now, with that said, I think there is there is a call and a need for basically patristic specialists. But at that point, you shouldn't be going through to patristics through, say, a New Testament angle. So if a patristic study is offered by a New Testament department, dump it. Absolutely dump it. It ain't going to be any good. If a patristics department, a patristics program is offered by, say, a church history department, then it could be really good. Then it can be fabulous. But this is going to depend from department to department, and I can't really give you a good university covering all three areas. You know, we'd be here all night. You'd have to be a little more specific on that for me to give you a recommendation. So with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Mouthwash for 15 Israeli shekels. Hey, Mouthwash, how's it going? Okay. You often say major recent works of scholarship. Well, Redford is not a recent work of scholarship. We have to be very, very careful what we mean by recent. Okay? We have to understand that this stuff changes so fast that a guy like Redford is out of date really fast. Let me see, when did he publish again? Just a refresher here.
Researchers like technology.
Yeah, he published that in 1992. Okay, so that's 21 years old. You know, that's not recent anymore. We find that, for example, if you do biblical studies, anything older than 50 years is considered to be woefully out of date. In most cases, you wouldn't even include that in say a scholarly work you're doing because it's just not recent enough. Now, with that said, however, there are some works that are still not out of date, even though they date to like the 19th century, especially, say, archaeological findings, transcriptions of certain texts. You know, there are just some things that you know, don't go out of date quite as easily. But things that require opinions, theories, hypotheses, you know, those things can go out of date real fast. And that was the problem with some of Redford's work, is he was very much, or he's still alive. He very much sort of, when it comes to his biblical work, his Egyptological work isn't quite so bad. He's more careful on his Egyptological work. I don't have a lot of problems with his Egyptological work, but his biblical work is so driven by theories and hypotheses and speculations that wow, those have basically come home to roost for him. So I don't think his opinions and his scholarship in biblical areas is very good, and it's especially not in the light of 21 years of change. So you know we have to understand that he published this right before the Tel Dan stele was discovered. I mean, the Tel Dan stele had changed everything. So, and we've had a lot happen since then. So so let's take the rest of the question. You often say that recent works of scholarship are outdated. Would you apply this pessimistic induction to the current state of the field? No. There's definitely things that are current and things that are out of date. Like, for example, if a finding supersedes a previous finding, it could have been published 3 years ago and it's still now out of date. But that's the thing with scholarship, is you have to sort of keep up on this. And it's really difficult to do. You know, this is why the primary job of a scholar is to read. And I can't seem to emphasize this enough, because we have a lot of clowns out there running around, you know, saying, I'm a professor, you know, and they never read. You know, and it's crazy. And many of our evangelical leaders who are doctors, you know, never read another book since graduating from university. It's like, well, would you want a medical doctor who never read a single medical journal again to be operating on you after 30 years? No, I don't think so. It's the job of a scholar to read. That's scholarship. It's reading. And there's a lot of for lack of a better word, scholars that have given up on reading. And some of this is that we've ceased being a reading culture. But we need to read more. Reading is what makes us scholars. You know, I've been to a I was once at a at the Evangelical Theological Society conference, and I won't mention the scholar to preserve the reputation, so-called, of the guilty. But, you know, he did a paper on, say, the Nephilim. And there's actually been a lot of publication done on the Nephilim. There's been 100 articles done on the Nephilim in the past century. There's a lot of publications. I mean, that's a lot. That is really a lot of reading. That's a lot of publications done for just one sort of Bible verse. You know, there's a lot of important public topics that never get that kind of attention and focus. But he was talking arguments that had, you know, been sort of, you know, destroyed in the 1930s. But he never read the scholarship. He didn't do the requisite reading before giving this paper. You know, he just sort of gave out his theory and just sort of expected everyone to just swallow it. And I basically told him, hey, look, your argument here is so out of date because you didn't do the reading. So as scholars, it's incumbent upon us to read and to know the current state of the scholarship. Now, I will fully admit that there's so many publications coming out right now, it's really, really hard to keep on top of it all. It's virtually impossible to keep on top of it all unless you have, say, an academic post where you can devote your attention to this. And I find it incredibly difficult to keep up with my reading. I try, but even I have really, really difficulties doing this because of my current situation. So, but that's part of being a scholar. Being a scholar is knowing what's current and keeping up on your reading. Anyway, thank you very much for your super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Justin Hall for $5. Okay. How about universities doing a PhD in OT or NT biblical scholarship? Okay, that's really going to depend. Okay, I know what you're trying to do. You eliminated the patristics from your last question to narrow it down. This is nowhere, this is not any more narrow, by the way, because each one of these is going to have a specialty, and I can't really advise you on New Testament, you know, because I'm not a New Testament scholar. I don't know what's a good program out there on New Testament. Old Testament, let me see here. There are some Scottish institutions, some Scottish universities that are producing good PhDs in Old Testament at the moment. I think Aberdeen is at the moment. I think there's some good stuff coming out of Aberdeen. So I think that's still a good program, but don't quote me on it. Also, if you do a PhD in Old Testament too, it's going to depend what angle you take. Okay? Now, because there's two angles you can take on an Old Testament PhD. You can just do straight Hebrew Bible, okay, and do that as an Old Testament field. You can also do what's called a cognate Old Testament specialization. With a cognate Old Testament specialization, what you're doing is you're taking a cognate with a special attention or focus upon the Old Testament. Like, for example, you can do Egyptology with a focus on Old Testament. You can do Assyriology with a focus on Old Testament. So you'd come out actually an Assyriologist or an Egyptologist. You could do a focus on geography with a attention to the Old Testament, and then you come out a geographer, quite literally, but you're still sort of considered to be an Old Testament have an Old Testament PhD. Now, I'm going to also raise a caveat there too. If you take an approach like that, say 15 years ago, seminaries were only hiring cognate Old Testament PhDs. Today, that sort of swung the other way. And a lot of this is because of the dominance of New Testament in departments at seminaries these days, because of, say, declining enrollment. Because of declining enrollment, a lot of seminaries have put the New Testament guys in charge, and New Testament guys only recognize purist Old Testament PhDs. So for those positions, they only want Hebrew Bible. Okay, but I will have to say too that those who just focus just strictly on the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and nothing else, are very parochial. It's very, very, you don't see a lot of those sort of PhDs, say, open to, say, cognate studies or ancient Near Eastern findings. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that sort of swing back to purist Hebrew Bible has really done the field a disservice. But that's sort of the state of play right now. But with that said, there are, I think, some very, very good universities out there for Old Testament. Dallas Theological Seminary still offers a very good PhD in Old Testament. Very good. I think there's other schools too that do. I wouldn't recommend any of sort of the big universities that offer Bible PhDs, like, say, University of Chicago or Brandeis. I definitely would not recommend Brandeis. Oh gosh, you don't know what you get coming out of there. I would not recommend Harvard Theological Seminary. I mean that's just a cesspool of woke thinking. So that's you'll get some crazy stuff coming out of Harvard Theological Seminary. So it's also very telling too that the entrance requirements for Harvard Theological Seminary are like a C- in your previous program. So it's not the same standards as Harvard University, even though they're on the same campus. So, but I do think there's places that do still offer really, really good Old Testament PhDs. So, I think what you need to do before you start considering a PhD in Old Testament, this is the best advice I can give you, is do a lot of reading. Find out what interests you. Where's your passion as you read? If you love reading a certain thing, that's what you should do. Okay? Do what you love to read. And then as you read articles, just check out the names of who wrote those articles. And then see if those people are willing to take you on as a PhD student. All these guys have public email addresses. Email them. See if there's a click there between you and that person. See if they're interested in taking you on as a student, and if what your research focus is interests them. Then decide on the university. So what I'm basically telling you is decide on the supervisor, not the university. If the supervisor is good, if the supervisor fits with what you're doing, then check out the program. See if the department is solid. If the department is solid, then go for it. So be less focused on the university and more on the supervisor. So that's the best advice I can give you. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Murray of Sweden again for 50 Swedish kroner. Thank you very much. I've heard you mention Ron White being a charlatan. Yeah, he was. Would you mind sharing some examples of the enormous discoveries he's made? Oh, that's a terrible thing to do to a sick and dying scholar. Let's see, what didn't Ron Wyatt discover? He discovered the.
Mentioned it in the Bible.
If it's mentioned in the Bible, he discovered it all. We don't have to do anything more. We can all go home. It's all done. Wyatt discovered everything.
It goes back to which archaeological sites are up.
He discovered the Red Sea crossing. He discovered the Ark of the Covenant. He discovered the skull of Adam, which happened to be, by the way, above the Ark of the Covenant. I'm not sure how that works. He discovered the real tomb where Christ was crucified, and his blood seeped down the cracks of the grave, hit the skull of Adam, then hit the Ark of the Covenant. He discovered Noah's Ark. He discovered, it's just, chariot wheels at the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba. Wow. This guy was just out in left field, and almost none of that stuff is actually legitimate. Okay, I'll go on a limb. I'll say none of that stuff is actually legitimate. He made he discovered the blood of Christ, and it had like a 20 X chromosomes and one Y. Well, that's the chromosomes of chromosomal pattern of a psychopath. That's what? It's just crazy the sort of yarn the guy would tell. It was just there was no limits to what he would do. It was so outrageous. And look, when he started off his thing, he duped a lot of people. He duped me. Okay, at that time I had no theological education. I was just a laity in the church, and I will admit, some of that story sounded real good. The Noah's Ark thing sounded real good. The blood touching the Ark of the Covenant sounded real good. But then you look at it again, and it's like, oh, wait, there's no evidence here. There's just stories. There's second-level accounts. There's no substance here. The whole discovering the real Mount Sinai in the Saudi Arabian desert, was just hokum. It was just hokum. So, it's really sad that people are still taken in by this even today. And it does irreparable damage. We couldn't, people do make fun of Ron Wyatt, but there's actually a real spiritual problem here. And that problem is people are basing their faith on this stuff. And when secularist comes by and says, oh wait, that's not true. See, I can easily prove that this is not true. It crashes people's faith. And people are left devastated. They're left absolutely devastated. Because they've based their faith on this. This is how they came to faith. See, one of the things is these people offer, like Ron Wyatt, they offer these vicarious voyages of faith. And what I mean by that is they tell you a story that brings you on that invites you along and brings you on this vicarious voyage. So you almost feel like you're an archaeologist alongside of him. And you're going and you're discovering it. And because you're discovering along with him, you personalize this. And this becomes a vehicle through which people come to believe. Well, the problem is without something solid there, without a real solid foundation, it destroys people's faith. This is my problem also with the Patterns of Evidence films. They've built this sort of vicarious voyage of faith, and it's going to end up destroying people's faith. And I think that's really sad, and I think that should concern us all. Because what we have here is a case of wolves coming in to eat sheep. These are people who are coming in to eat sheep and destroy and disperse the flock. So, charlatans do damage. They do serious damage, and I think not enough people talk about this. And I find this to be very painful. I find this very, very painful because, there is good evidence out there. Really, really good evidence for a lot of these things. And it's just being covered over by this garbage. You know, and by the time you sweep away the garbage, you know, people have lost their faith and moved on. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Ryan Naylor for $10. Any thoughts on the recent Hobby Lobby Antiquities debacle? Yes. Joel Baden, no friend of evangelicals, yep, wrote Bible Nation, the United States Hobby Lobby, in which he was critical of the Green family. Okay. There is definitely reason to be critical of the Green family here and of Hobby Lobby. Now, I don't deny what Hobby Lobby attempted to do with the Museum of the Bible was a good thing. On a fundamental level, I think it's a good thing. I think how they did it was wrong. You know, they really should have, you know, done proper acquisitions. And frankly, there's enough of this material out there that they didn't have to. Really do what they did, you know. And frankly, some museums use replicas. You know, why couldn't they have used some replicas for other, you know, things? Like, for example, you go to the Oriental Institute in Chicago, and you'll see a replica there of the Code of Hammurabi. You know, the big black stela of the Code of Hammurabi. It's a replica. The real one's in the British Museum. You know, the Greens have the money. They could have had replicas made. Yeah, okay, you know, the idea that it's all, you know, authentic artifacts is attractive, but no museum does this. You know, no museum has everything a replica, everything original. You know, so they could have defrayed some of it by that. I think some of it was just, you know, bad planning, poor execution, you know, trying to skirt the laws, you know, and thinking they you know, I mean, they have lawyers out the you know, they have lawyers, you know, stacked a mile high. Why didn't they use some of their lawyers to actually conduct these purchases? You know, at least that would have, you know, if the lawyer had misbehaved, then, you know, they could have then gone to, you know, sued the lawyers. So, I think it was really, really precipitous and badly considered what Hobby Lobby did. And a good friend of mine has also been a great critic of the Hobby Lobby too, which is Christopher Rolston. You know, he's a good friend of mine, and I think he's been very, very correct about his analysis of the whole Hobby Lobby debacle, and actually has written a lot better and more nuanced material than Joel Baden. You know, at least in the case of Christopher Rolston, he's not, say, an enemy of believers, you know, like Joel is. So I think Rolston is a lot more nuanced about this than Joel is. So I think there's definitely cause to be critical of them, but I also think what they're doing is a good thing as well. And frankly, museums do have, I mean, a lot of, say, you know, Joel Baden's criticism too is not just that, you know, that of what the Joel family did, but how they're presenting the artifacts. You know, he would love nothing better than a documentary hypothesis perspective put into that museum. So that's really sort of where he's coming from on this. So I don't think that's warranted either. So, you know, just because it has sort of a more evangelical, biblicist, you know, biblical maximalist perspective doesn't make it a bad museum. But at the same time, too, if you're going to do a good thing, do it the right way. You know, this is that the ends does not justify the means. The means have to support themselves. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Let's see, we have another super chat here, I think, from Anthony Rougier for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. I find the speculative nature of modern biblical studies, especially when compared to Egyptology or Assyriology. Is this a trend you have also seen? Yeah, to some extent, yeah. But a reason why it's often more speculative is because it's less data-driven and more driven by secondary literature. You do find this particular problem in biblical studies where you have a very, very small text, and we're talking about the Old Testament here. I mean, for some people, that's not a small text, but it is in the grand scheme of things. It's a small text with a huge body of secondary literature that goes back thousands of years. You know, we got 2,000 years of secondary literature or more. Okay. That secondary literature plays a lot into how biblical studies, you know, conducts its analysis and theories. So because that is all that secondary literature is often divorced from archaeology, Assyriology, Egyptology, even say, you know, geography, you know, stuff on the ground. It tends to be a lot more speculative in nature. So it is a trend, and it's not a recent trend. We got to be clear about that too. This trend has been going on for a long time. We've seen this at least since, say, the Enlightenment. You know, since the Enlightenment, people have been doing these sort of speculations on the interpretation of biblical scriptures. You know, and you know, it even comes in the form of translations. You know, so we do find examples where, you know, people didn't know what something was, so they would you know, speculate on what, say, a word means. Let me give you an example here, which is, if I can find it. There we go. Is Joshua 11:13. Okay. Now this particular speculation actually goes back to the King James Version. And this one is, you know, I'll pull up the King James Version so I can quote it verbatim. Okay. Now, Joshua 11:13. As for the cities that stood in their strength, Israel burned none of them. Okay, it's that in that strength. Now, when the King James Version was done in 1611, the word here is tell. It's essentially a heap or a mound that's been done, that developed over time because a city was destroyed, filled in by debris, another city was built upon it, it was destroyed, then filled in, and over time, this big sort of square hill forms on this. So we now know today that this should be translated, but as for cities that stood on their tells, okay? But in 1611, no translator of the King James Bible had been to Israel, and no archaeological discovery had been done. And ironically, the New King James Version still translates this as mounds. Okay, so it's better than strength. Okay, but the nuance is not quite there. So we do find that this also creeps into translations too. So it isn't just say biblical studies, it's also translators, it's exegetes. You'll find commentaries that still rely on speculations that were done, you know, years past, that are just sort of passed down now as academic tradition. So it's a common problem. And I think the more that cognate studies is done in cognate studies, we'll see less of that over time, but it's going to be a slow process. But this is why I did cognate studies, is because I understood that, you know, this is something that happens in the field. So anyway, thank you very much for the question and the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, that's it for super chats. Let's see if we can find some more
Did you get
Swiftsies.
Disciple of Christ?
Disciple of Christ. Okay.
Thoughts on undergrad and sent me, he said, then postgrad. Undergrad online and postgrad in person.
I did not get that. Did that come through? Let me check here.
It's on the chat.
Yeah, I know it's on the chat. Okay, no, I didn't get that, but we will get that now. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Justin Hall for $5. How about... Wait. No, that's not it. Sorry. Okay, it doesn't seem to be on... Didn't seem to come through on my post here. Disciple of Christ. Okay. All right, well, we'll just post it up here. We'll just pin it up. Where's my pin? It's not allowing me to pin. Well, that's unfortunate. Okay, I cannot just type it. Well, this is what I can do. Okay, this is what I can do here. I will copy it here. Put it back in the chat. Okay, and that should come out of mine. And then I'll select it like that. Okay. Now, this is from Disciple of Christ. This is a super chat that, because of my wonky software, did not make it through. So for $2, thank you very much, Disciple of Christ. Thoughts on undergrad online, then postgrad online? Okay, never do postgrad online. Absolutely never do that. Oh, you meant in person? Okay. Yes, postgrad in person, definitely the way to go. Undergrad online, okay, my only caveat with undergrad online, you could do that, but your chances of getting into a postgrad situation are much, much lower. Okay? It hurts your chances of getting in. Okay? So it hurts your chances for getting into a postgrad program. It doesn't prepare you as well for a postgrad program, because by the time you've gotten into a postgrad program, you're doing now much more nuanced, much more. The fact is, the whole university thing is a culture. It's a culture. Okay, it's more than just. It's more than just learning. It's more than just knowledge acquisition. It is a culture. And if you don't go through the undergrad, you don't become enculturated. That's going to make your time in postgrad a lot more difficult. Now, I'll say this too. I'll say this. I'm going to add a bonus question here because, I get this too. Should I jump from a bachelor's degree right into the PhD, or should I do the bachelor's, master's, PhD? Okay. I always recommend doing the bachelor's, master's, PhD. And the reason I always recommend this is while it's more difficult to get into a PhD from a master's, you're also much more likely to succeed once you're in the PhD program. Your chances of succeeding going from bachelor's to a PhD is much, much lower. It's much more difficult to actually succeed. The reason why is because you haven't become enculturated to the whole grad school thing. And what the master's degree does is give you 2 years to enculturate to graduate school. Because it's not just a bachelor's degree plus, it's a whole different shooting match. But there is some overlap between undergrad and a master's degree, okay, in culture. So let's say you've done your undergrad online, and then you go off and you do your master's degree. You are coming into your master's degree with no cultural reference. Okay. Now, when I did my master's degree, I did my bachelor's degree at the University of British Columbia, and then I took a hiatus. I had like a 20-year hiatus between my bachelor's and my graduate degree. It was still a culture shock when I started my master's degree. It was I hadn't been in a classroom for 20 years. But at least, you know, within, say, 8 weeks, I had my feet under me. And I could really sort of excel at the master's degree. If I had tried the same thing with doing an online degree, there's no cultural reference there. I would have been lost. You know, I wouldn't know what, say, the real academic rules are. And there are written and unwritten academic rules. So I think it's really, really important to do as much of this in person as you can. Now, I understand if for some reason you cannot do it in person, like, for example, you might be taking care of your sick mother and can't do it, can't go in person. Okay, I get that. I get that. But really understand that it's the alternative you choose when you have no other alternative. If you have the alternative, do it in person. You know, even if you have to hold a day job and do it at the same time. And I've done this. So it's not that I'm not saying, yeah, do as I say and don't do as I do. My first 2 years of my master's of divinity degree, I was holding a 50-hour a week day job in IT and doing 3/4 of, which is considered full-time, a 3/4 study for my master's degree. So I understand that there are pressures that you have to do sometimes, but I still did it in person. You have to do this in person if you want the most benefit out of it. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, let's see here. See another RG Strategy super chat here. Thank you very much. $10 super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. I thought I sent a super chat. It is now a habit. Well, thank you, because it really helps keep us going. You know, we do a lot of this stuff on a shoestring. We do it, we do this sacrificially. So your super chats really help us to continue to bring these live streams, to bring you these videos. Helps us to do the work. So it's really appreciated. And I really want to thank you, because it really helps. Which ancient Egyptian temple is your favorite? I know questions are getting simpler. Also, your book is 35% off on the Christian bookstore. Well, I think one lesson I learned from publishing my book is never publish your book in a pandemic year. Sales have not been good because of the pandemic year. So I have a feeling that my publisher is not going to want to talk to me next time I want to pitch a book to them. So so I am actually glad they're sort of doing something for a change to sell the book. So I would, if you haven't bought the book, please consider doing so. It does help us get the next book out, because if the publisher makes a profit on these books, they're more likely to take a chance on me a second time. So I do appreciate all of you who have purchased my book. Which ancient Egyptian temple is my favorite? Ooh, tough one. Well, that is really tough. My favorite temple has to be the temple of Seti I at Abydos. Beautiful temple, absolutely beautiful temple. Great ambiance. Oh my gosh, you go in there and there's sunbeams coming out from the roof down below, and it's a spectacular temple. It's got ritual processional furniture all over the place. More barks than like 11 barks reliefs in that in that temple. It's an amazing temple. Still holds many of its original color. It has one of the king's lists. It has the Seti the First king's list. It's an amazing temple. It's got some really beautiful, wonderful work in there. It's by and large my favorite temple. Just gorgeous, gorgeous temple. But I do have to admit I have others that are really sort of near and dear to me too. So, but the Abydos Temple of Seti the First is absolutely amazing. It's well worth it. It's hard to get to, but it is well worth it. And if you ever get the chance to see it, it is simply phenomenal. Others I would recommend too. Dindara Temple, beautiful temple. It's Ptolemaic. It's very late Ptolemaic, but it's gorgeous. It's really a beautiful temple. I like Luxor Temple too, but I like Luxor Temple for a variety of reasons. It's got, especially, they keep that temple open like into the evening. So one of the things I like about Luxor Temple is you can go there like at 7 p.m. when the sun is setting, and you get this beautiful sunset between the columns. Gorgeous. It's also got some neat reliefs inside the bark chapels too, which are well worth seeing. I also like that it's very close to McDonald's. And after eating Egyptian food for 10 days, you start really craving McDonald's. I'm not a big fan of Egyptian food. I just don't like it. It's so bland. So bland. It just makes a Big Mac look so tempting it isn't even funny. But anyway, that's my favorite temple, you know, the Abydos Temple of Seti the First. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Sentinel Apologetics for $2 Australian. Thank you very much. Popcorn. Poking? Popcorn. How are you? I'm well. Except for that jab I got yesterday. That just like laid me on my back. That was not fun. Not poking? Oh, Popcorn King. Oh, it does say Popcorn King. It truncated it here.
Poking works.
Poking works, yeah. I got poked in my jab. Yeah, I'm under the weather today, but I'm actually feeling good about the live stream. The chair is supporting me through this, so I'm getting through it, and we are getting through the live chat. So thank you very much for the super chat. I hope you're well too. Good to see you. Okay, Amir Eshafrah for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. A correction underneath it?
Last comment. HK3W.
Heka. Ooh. Okay. Oh, it's essentially the same thing. You know, can you break down the Egyptian word Heka and its usage? You made the correction of Heka. It's essentially the same thing. One is the sort of the plural of the other. A Heka is essentially the plural of the form Heka. So it's essentially the same thing. And if I take it correct, because you know it's one of the things we have to kind of understand that Egyptian language is homonymic. That means you've got a lot of words that sound the same but have different meanings, which is why the Egyptian language used determinatives. Okay, so a lot of times I can't actually determine exactly what a word means by its transliteration, because it's one of those things where it could mean a variety of things. Now, I believe what you mean here is Heka with a .h meaning magic. Okay, that's what I think you mean here, and do correct me if I'm wrong here, because as I said, it's homonymic, and can make things even worse. Egypt has 4 H's. Okay, 4 H's. Each one is signified by different diacritical marks. So when we try to bring this into an an English transliteration using Latin characters that don't use diacritical marks, it could be one of several H's. Okay, so that makes the ambiguity even worse. Yeah, Egyptian has like 4 H's, 2 S's, 2 T's, 2 D's. Oh, it can make for a lot of fun when it comes to transliterating something. Okay, but I'm gonna assume here you mean magic, as in say the frog goddess magic, Heka, or just magic in general. Now, in this particular case, the usage of magic, as in Heka, can refer to a variety of practices, everything from execration spells to curses to protection spells for children to love potions, not love potions, but love spells. You know, there's a huge variety of different applications of Heka. It can also mean, say, strange events too, that are seen to have been magical as well. So this is where you say, okay, you have the determinative, I mean, okay, you're gonna have to give me, you see, the problem with a determinative is a determinative does not have a phonetic pronunciation. Okay, so that's gonna change this question too, because unless you give me the Gardner sign number, it can be very, very difficult to trace down a determinative, because a determinative has no pronunciation, and on its own it can give you a class. Like, for example, the same determinative can be used in a number of ways for a number of different meanings. So there's ambiguity. The determinatives both resolve ambiguity, but at the same time too, they can also sort of create ambiguity. Okay, now if you are talking about, say, the determinative for say the frog determinative, as often associated with Heka meaning magic, it can have a whole range of different meanings. But let me see if I can pull up some of those meanings, because it's, again, it can be very, very wide here. So let's see here what we got. As my NAS chugs again. Okay. Okay, that's different. All right, so we'll take that instead. Okay. The determinative of the seated god. Okay, now that's not Heka. I can be very honest here, that's not Heka. That actually has no pronunciation. Okay, and the determinative of the seated god can be used with a variety of words. It's most likely used with either, say, most likely deities. So the seated god is almost used with, say, male deities. Not even female deities, because oftentimes female deities will use either the woman determinative or the cobra goddess determinative for a female goddess. So with the determinative for a seated god, it's most often used with, say, with divinities. Okay. Now the determinative of the seated god can also be used with deceased kings. So sometimes you'll see a king's name with, say, the seated king determinative followed by the seated god determinative, you know, showing that he's now a dead king and now a divine king. So you can see that sometimes too. But that's really sort of the range where you find the seated god determinative. Okay? So I hope that answers that question. Thank you for clarifying it. I do appreciate that, because again, as a homonymic language, Egyptian can be very, very vague. So Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now, we don't have any more super chats, and I think we will take, we're at the hour-and-a-half mark here, so we will take one more, at least one more non-super chat. And, oh, we've got another one. Murray of Sweden for 50 Swedish kroners. Thank you very much. Can we know if the Strebo inscription is about Gideon or from the judges? No. Or is it mostly speculation at this point? Okay, we can't know if it's from from Gideon. Okay, that we can't know because we don't have enough to tie it to him. We know it's contemporary with him. We know that that it is the name. That's pretty much about all we know here. But as far as anything beyond that, it's a little bit out of his territory. So it's possible that it could have been a wine jug from Jeroboam, or it could have been something that had been moved across. We don't know. So there isn't actually enough here to say. Now, the one thing that makes me almost suspect that this is the real Gideon. Okay, but this is speculation, and please just take it as speculation. The one thing that makes me suspect that this is the real Gideon is the fact that Jeroboam is a pejorative. Okay? If you are a Canaanite worshiper, if you're a worshiper of Baal, okay, you were the worshiper of Baal, you know, you're a Baal devotee. You're not going to name your kid Jeroboam. You're just not going to do it. Because Jeroboam means let Baal contend with him. Let Baal deal with him. You'd have to be a very, very crappy parent to name your kid Jeroboam if you're a Baal worshiper. Okay? In fact, we know from the narrative in the Judges that Gideon was named Jeroboam as a pejorative, as a you know, sort of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. You know, you'd never name your kid this if you were a Baal worshiper. So that's what gives me this is why I think it's the same person. But again, it's speculation. I don't think we have enough evidence to say for sure. But that's my speculation on this. Okay? So, but it is going to be mostly speculation on this point because we just don't have enough data. And data is everything in this field. Data is everything. Evidence. We base our conclusions on evidence. And speculation is what we speculate in the absence of evidence. So, I hope that gives you some insight into this. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, let's see if we can take a non-super chat. I'm gonna buzz to the center of the list. Now, for those of you who don't do super chats, I don't have a method. This question came up last week. Does he start from the top of the list and go down, or does he start from the bottom of the list and go up? No, he starts randomly, completely randomly. And I choose non-super chat questions based upon how interesting they are. If it's an interesting question, yeah, I'll fix onto it and I'll answer it. I love interesting questions. But I don't have a method for picking one super chat over the other. Or sorry, one non-super chat over the other. So if you're trying to figure me out on that, well, plenty of luck there. Okay. Let's see here. So is there one in the middle here that I can find? Okay, I don't see one in the middle. No questions in the middle. That's pretty unusual. All right, I'll take this one from Justin Fowler. Okay. Can we deduce when Joseph was vizier by when private property was sold over to the king of Egypt? Did that become permanent status quo in Egypt? Yes or no? Okay. We can actually, we do know that all the property in Egypt was owned by the Hyksos king. And we actually know this outside of the biblical narrative. Okay. This appears in the biography of Mess. Now, Mess has to establish that he is descendant of one of the soldiers of King Ahmose. Because one of the things that King Ahmose I did was when he conquered the Hyksos, he gave each of his soldiers a parcel of land. That was their reward for signing on with him, because the Hyksos had acquired all ownership of all the land. Okay? So we do have some indication here of when this happened. So we can deduce from this that Joseph was vizier during the second intermediate period, during Dynasty 15. And this is when the Hyksos sort of gained it all. You know, they bought all the land and taxed heavily because of it. Now, did it become a permanent status quo in Egypt? Yes and no. Okay. It didn't quite become permanent. It wasn't sort of universal in the same way as it had been, say, during the Hyksos period. What happened was, after the breakup of the Hyksos land holdings, you know, some went to private individuals, but those were the elite in the army. The king, of course, kept a huge portion of this, and several were given as land grants to temples. So it was more broken up than before. However, it was never democratized. So your typical farmer never owned their own land. And frankly, they didn't own their own land. Their own land holdings weren't permanent anyway, because of the way the Nile flooded. So the Nile would essentially flood, wash people out, homes out every year, and then it would recede, and then your typical farmer would get a plot of land that they would till in after the flood receded, and then it'd be washed out again. The land that's being talked about as the permanent land holdings, this was land at the edge of the flood zone. Okay, so this was sort of the property that was sort of still arable, that you could make arable through canals and through channels and through hydrology, but it wasn't area that flooded constantly. Okay, so this was the most coveted land in Egypt, and it's that land that was really sort of at stake here. So again, and I should mention too that even the sort of the land holdings in the flood zones were also bought out by the Hyksos too. So you know, that was the land that the king took. The king took that land. That was his land. Was those flood regions, because then he could portion that out and tax it. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay. I will take one more super chat here, and then let's go to the beginning. Right, this one's simple. I'm going to take this one because I can answer this one quickly. From What Why? Question: I am moving out of my apartment tomorrow. I'm sorry. Makes me wonder, did Egyptians used to move around in Egypt? Yes, they did, from the flood zone to the non-flood zone. And they did that every year. Or were they usually in the same house their whole lives? If they were aristocracy, they could have their house for their whole lives. If they weren't, they would, after the flood, go down to their assigned plot and build a mud hut, which would then get destroyed at the next flood. And the farming class would have to relocate every year to high ground until the floods receded. So they did move, but they didn't move from town to town. They just moved from high ground to low ground. So that's basically the extent of how much mobility they had. Essentially, they were serfs. They couldn't actually leave the area. And this was true of all classes. It doesn't matter if you were a prince, a nobility, craftsman. You were sequestered. You were more or less a prisoner of your particular profession and where you lived. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. And I will take one final question here, and then I'm going to call it a night. I want one that's interesting. Give me an interesting question. Let's see here. I'm going to take this one. Yes, this one's interesting to me. My favorite disciple of Christ. Your favorite anime. Thoughts on Neo Genesis Evangelion. All right. Now you picked something that piques my interest. My favorite anime is Mobile Suit Gundam. Okay. I am just a die-hard Gundam fan. I don't collect any of the models, but I used to, and I love the models. The models are fantastic. I love the storyline. I love that whole narrative, and there is one Gundam in there that I think is just absolutely fantastic that I would highly recommend. Let's see if I can find this here. So far my favorite in the whole series has been let's see here. Thunderbolt. Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt was a fantastic serial. It was absolutely amazing. It was a poignant story of sacrifice. It was just it made you cry. It made you cry. It was and Gundam stories often will sort of mess with your emotions, because they're war stories, and they don't show it as sort of naive heroism. It shows sacrifice. It shows that people dying. So I think it's a way of telling a war story that's futuristic, but not idealistic. So that's why the whole Gundam series really resonates with me. Now, Neo Genesis Evangelion, I have to admit I've only gotten through I think the first 2 episodes of it, and it sort of didn't resonate with me in the same way. I know a lot of people really like it, but it just wasn't wasn't there for me. So I do have a lot of favorite anime, and you have to kind of understand, I've been watching anime since the 1980s. Okay, I watched anime before it was ever cool to do so. So I've seen an awful lot of anime. So I have a broad base to which to and I realize that for many people, Neo Genesis Evangelion was sort of the mecha, revived the mecha genre for a generation. So I recognize its contributions. However, it's kind of hard to get into that when you already have a love for Gundam under your belt. So thank you very much for that question. That was a great question, and I do see a couple of more super chats, and we'll take those and then we'll call it a night. And it's two right one after the other. So Dante Powers for $2. Thank you. Check out my non-super chats. And then Dante's Powers for $2 again. Any of my questions at the very beginning. Okay. Let's go to the very beginning here. Let's see what we have from Dante's Powers. So... oh, okay. Well, we'll take this one here. That's the first one, and he did give us 2 super chats. So, all right. Dante's Powers. What is your theory on how kingship developed as an institution, as opposed to how other forms of government, as is there's many origins for crown or diadem as a symbol of kingship? Okay. The diadem is a later development, and there were crowns that in the ancient Near East that weren't diadems. The ancient Near Eastern crown was really looked more like a bowling pin that you wore on your head than anything else. And if you go through ancient Near Eastern stuff, you'll see the bowling pin that's on, say, the statues of gods and kings. You know, it wasn't just the white crown of Egypt that was like this. It was a crown that was used all over the ancient Near East. You'll see this used in the Levantine kings. You'll even see it in some, say, Mesopotamian gods. So, you do see this symbol all over the place. The development of kingship does seem to have its roots in agrarian culture. It does seem to be that kingship does seem to have developed as a result of people settling down in a place and starting to farm. But the problem with when you get people starting to farm is you need bigger infrastructure. In Egypt, you needed canals built. You also needed this in Mesopotamia. You know, people would build, settlements by, say, the Euphrates, but had no way to get water. So what happened was kingship seems to have developed from the need to move water from rivers into plots of land. And as a result of organizing all this and protecting those holdings, seems to be how kingship developed. Kingship seems to have developed out of that need for both organization and protection. Because otherwise you'd have people just come in, raid the farms and just take what they want. And, this happened. This happened in the ancient Near East all the time. A lot of the iconography we see of the kings, of Egypt, defeating enemies, is basically still driven by the need to protect the food supply from outside incursions. So, and we find that, this is a perennial problem in the ancient Near East, and kingship is at its weakest in the ancient Near East when it can't protect that food supply, when the infrastructure breaks down. So that seems to be how it began as an institution. Now, in Mesopotamia, there's also some allusion to that, say, the early temples of the ziggurats of Mesopotamia were also storehouses for grain. So there is some evidence to suggest that kingship also developed as a collective organization. So in, say, Mesopotamia, where you had the canals and the land and the protection, you also had, say, the gathering of all the food into the storehouse, and then the king would redistribute it. Suppose if he was a good king, he redistributed it fairly. So that seems to be the origins of kingship in the ancient Near East. And it wasn't long afterwards that the crown as a symbol of kingship became synonymous with kingship. So that seems to have gone hand in glove. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. And I will take one more since you did give me 2 super chats because you really wanted to draw my attention. This will be the last one. I see your question on Bronze Age Greece. Unfortunately, I don't know much about Bronze Age Greece, so I can't really answer that one. Do you have any others than Greece? Apparently you don't. So we will take that last one. You have one there. Okay. Oops, no, that's not it. I missed it by one. Okay, what are the earliest writings in Egyptian literature that discusses Greece and their culture? They don't talk about Greece so much. They do. It's not really something that's really on their mind. The Egyptians really didn't discuss foreign cultures very much, so you don't actually see a lot of writing in Egyptian literature about any foreign culture because it wasn't their interest. Their interest was really concerned Egypt. You know, that was the center of their universe. Outside of Egypt is chaos, and heathens and barbarians and all nastiness is outside of Egypt. You basically have, and the Egyptians would say, you know, had the word Ta for land. Ta-we means the 2 lands, that's Upper and Lower Egypt. And then they had Ta-u, which meant the world. You know, not only the 2 lands, but that world of chaos outside of Egypt. The Isfit meaning chaos. So that's outside of Egypt. Okay? So all those foreign lands are Isfit. You know, it's chaos. So they really didn't have a great concern for all the surrounding nations. So with that said, they didn't have a large sort of interest in Greece. Now, we do know that Greece did establish a trading colony in the 7th century BC at Naucratis. Okay? That's more Greece being interested in Egypt, though, than Egypt being interested in Greece. So at the 7th century BC, we already see now a start to say that interrelationship between them. But it happens before then. I believe there's a reference to Keftiu, which is the, you know, the Egyptian word for Greece, and it occurs, I believe, either on the base of the statue of Amenhotep III or Ramses III. I can't recall exactly, but it's one of those 2. So it does occur, at least. We do see a recognition of Greece as early as, say, the 18th or 19th dynasties. So by that point in time, we're already starting to see it in the New Kingdom. But we don't see any reference to Greece earlier than the New Kingdom in Egypt. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. And we're going to call that a night for our questions. I do very much appreciate all the questions that have been submitted today. Thank you very much for the super chats. It does help us keep going. Thank you very much to my Patreon subscribers and to those channel subscribers that, you know, help us with Google and their analytics. And again, if you get the opportunity to buy my book, please do so, since it's currently on sale. And that book is called The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context, an Illustrated Journey. With that said, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and have a good night. I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.